Steve, who was D.M. Canright, and why has the SDA Church sought to destroy him? Because in chapter 2 of your book, you get into the threat of D.M. Canright to the SDA Church. So can you go into that some for the audience?
Yeah, just a brief summary. Canright didn't grow up in a religious home. His dad wasn't religious. His previous ancestors had been, but he grew up on a farm. His dad was civic minded. He was a great community person, but he wasn't educated. He wasn't high on education. Canright had a real hunger for education. He paid for his own education, took trains, paid for everything, in spite of the fact that his father wasn't supportive of it. And he had no religious background until he came across some Baptists as he was approaching, I think, 18 years old at the time. And they helped him, understand the gospel and accept the gospel. And he was quite excited about that. He had a real passion for the things that they shared with him. But the next year, he got transferred to an Adventist school because of a relative living in New York, it was, I believe. And so for the first time now, he was in an Adventist school. And James and Ellen, this was back in the early days of the movement, 5,000 or less. There weren't that many people in the movement. And so James and Ellen would go right around to the schools and recruit. They were big on recruiting young people that they felt had potential. And they saw a lot of potential in Canright. So they recruited him to live in their home and work for them. And they did the same thing with his brother. They did the same thing with his wife, Lucretia. She was in the White Home. She didn't live with them quite the same way that Canright did for the period, but she was there a lot, and Ellen kind of adopted her as a daughter. So they saw the inside of the White's life, the marital stuff, Canright describes. He saw them take all these old books that were worthless that they owned and come up with the idea that, hey, we can get a bunch of money for these by forcing the church to buy these books from us and send them out free to the mission field and all this kind of stuff. So they came up with this clever plan to take all these worthless books that no one wanted and force the church to buy them. And of course, Ellen had visions that God was telling every member to support this work and buy these books. Well, they're personally paying the Whites for these books. And Canright saw this whole thing, and that was kind of one of the early things that really put questions in his mind, along with the hypocrisy on diet and, Ellen and James downing the 200-pound porkers when she's writing her health message that everyone's to be strict vegetarian. And, he sees all the hypocrisy. And yet he has a lot of cognitive dissonance because the Whites have helped him. They've gotten him into the ministry. He's a favorite son. He's given opportunities that the Whites alone were able to give people. So he shot right up the ranks of Adventist ministers. So he owed a lot to the Whites. And at the same time, he saw the hypocrisy. He saw the lies. He saw the financial dishonesty. James was accused of embezzling from the church way back early on. The messenger party, etc., left the church over Ellen's false prophecies, and the shut door, and the James embezzling money from the church, and Ellen was part of that. But Canright had this real double whammy going on where Adventism was everything. It was his whole identity. It was his career. It was his life. His wife was tied to it. They were all tied to the Whites. And then they were seeing more and more of this very troubling stuff that said, how can this be a prophet of God? This is just very troubling because they were sincere, honest believers and not con artists the way the Whites were. And so then, when they vacationed with him and and Ellen wrote the 25-page letter condemning them after James and Canright had a blow up. They at that point they realized, holy Toledo, this woman's she just makes stuff up and attributes it to God, and it comes out of a blow up. So she immediately has God downloading a 25-page letter, which she claims he showed her all this stuff way earlier, but now he was telling her to write it. Yeah, right. It's the bottom line is Canright knew way more about Ellen, her personal life, than any other critic of Ellen White by far. He was living right in their home. He saw everything firsthand. He was also a brilliant guy. He was the one who represented Adventists in all the major debates when they went up against Miles Grant. Anyone could have done that. Could have been James White, could have been Loughborough, could have been any of them. They all selected Canright. Canright was the one who was considered to be the best defender. He knew Adventist theology better than any other person. And James wasn't even a student. He stole the stuff from the young guys and claimed it was his own, as Canright documents. But the bottom line was all the other churches knew Canright because he was the one that would debate against them. So this guy has a lot of gravitas. He has a lot of credibility outside Adventism and inside Adventism. So that's the reason he was such an incredible threat, is he had all the personal knowledge of James and Ellen. He witnessed it firsthand. He wasn't relying on rumors or secondhand information. He saw it firsthand. And he was also the spokesman for Adventist teaching and theology, and he understood it better than anyone else in the church. So when he came to realize it's not the true gospel, this isn't really what the Bible teaches, who's going to be more threatening than the person who represented the church to defend them? So he was definitely an extreme threat. There's just absolutely no question about that.
Yeah, and I mean, as you're obviously aware, that's not the picture that's painted of Canright in the SDA Church.
For sure.
You're going to get this sort of, he's an arch heretic. He's a total backstabbing Judas type individual.
Right. Benedict Arnold.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing that's so interesting is, has the SDA Church utilized Alberto Tim's advice regarding fairly representing Canright? The criticisms he was just making against you in that paper, is he utilizing that same standard when it comes to DM Canright? No, they're not. Are you looking at all of the sources? He's saying that, Steve Daly in his book, he may claim that he has 326 sources, but that's only going to impress the uninformed individual. These sorts of statements, they're not using their own standard that they're claiming the critics of Adventism need to use when it comes to their criticisms of Canright. You mentioned a little bit there his relationship to the whites. That's another area that they've sort of tried to rewrite history and twist the facts and say, well, this man had an axe to grind against the whites. He was he was angry at them, etc. Can you speak into that a little bit more? What sort of relationship did he have with the whites on a personal level?
He cut the whites way more slack. People that try to say, I copied DM Canright. DM Canright never called Ellen White a fraud. DM Canright never called Ellen White a con artist. DM Canright never came close to criticizing the whites the way I have. And I base it all on what they wrote, what they said, their own source documentation. But Canright loved these people. He wept at her funeral. That was the one thing that was true that Adventists accused him of. But all the other stuff is just pure lies that he recanted, that he wanted back in, that he said he was a lost man. All the stuff they throw at him is a pure lie. And he wasn't an angry person. He was the one that wanted the truce when he left Adventism. He was the one that said, I'll never say a word about Adventists if you promise not to attack me. But they couldn't resist. They brought all this on themselves. And, back to Tim, the guy is the ultimate hypocrite, because here he accuses me of being biased, not being fair, not using sources correctly, when I'm 100% true to my research question. But then he turns around and writes a book review. What is a book review supposed to do? It's supposed to be fair to the entire book. So his obligation as a book reviewer is to be fair to my entire psychobiography. He doesn't even address the main sources and the main evidence, which is source documented from her own pen, her own life, her and James. It's source documented stuff. It's not me making stuff up. It's not me making accusations apart from the absolute evidence. I mean, it's just unbelievable that he could be such a hypocrite, that when, as a reviewer, he was a 100% failure on the very things that he accuses me of doing, when they didn't apply to me because I was true to my research question. It's almost mind-boggling that a person could be so hypocritical and think he could get away with it. It's just ridiculous.